Today guys, we're going to be going over a notch stick and how to make basic notches. So hang in there and we'll get right into it. Alright guys, today we're going to be doing a notch stick and learning basic notches, and what you're going to need for that is a stick to carve and a knife to do it with. Alright guys, so the first thing I did with this stick is I removed the bark before we start our notch stick. You don't have to, I just like to do it. Easier to work with. So the first thing we'll be doing with our notch stick is we'll be starting at one end. So a notch stick this big, you can do tons of different notches. There's a bunch of them, but I'm only going to be covering a few. So the first thing we're going to be talking about is you would use this for any kind of stake you want to pound in the ground or anything along those lines, like a stake, or if you're putting poles in for a fire reflector. They all use the same thing. And what that is we're going to take our knife, and at the top of your stick you're just going to round it off all the way around, just like that, just taking small angles off into the stick, and then you can just clean up that top ring a bit. So what this is going to allow is it's going to allow the stick to take a beating from, say, the back of an axe, if you were to use this as a hammer on this stick, and it will stop it from mushrooming out. Alright guys, so the next one we're going to jump into is the stake notch. Now this is a very simple notch. The dynamics and the name of this comes from its application. A lot of times you'll use it for making a stake for the rope somewhere to sit. This notch is also used on a lot of primitive traps and so on and so forth. So to do this notch, all we're going to do is we're going to take our knife and we want to cut down into the stick, straight down into it. So all I like to do is I like to have a firm grip on my knife. Keep your fingers off the back side, so if you cut through your stick or whatever, you don't cut your fingers. And I'll place my blade on here just like this, and using my thumb to kind of hold it in place, I'll rock the stick back and forth on my blade to dig in. So once you get it where you want it, just like that, what we can do is we're going to cut in on an angle towards our stop cut. So the reason we put that straight line through our stick, you see it right here, the reason we put that there is so when we cut at an angle, a chunk of wood is, once we get to that stop cut, that chunk of wood is going to pop out and we're going to have our notch. So step two, we're just going to take the knife like this and push to our stop cut and pop out our little wedge here. And then you just want to clean it up. So I have a little bit left over right here, so we'll just get in here with the knife. And all you're doing to clean it up is you're doing the same two steps, cutting straight down and a little in to get the depth of the notch you want. So as you can see, we have an angle coming in this way with a straight up here. So this would work in a sense for a stake notch, is if I have my rope, it would go around the stake here, so when it gets pulled in a direction, it grabs. Alright guys, so the next notch we're going to be going over is the V notch. So this notch can also be used for a similar application as the stake notch, to hold rope or anything to a stick. You can also use a V notch. You can use it for like some raised platforms. So if you cut the V notch, you can lay another stick in there and it will hold. There's also a rounded like cabin notch or log notch. I'm not going to be covering that in this video, but it's a similar premise. But for the V notch, what we're going to be doing is, instead of like the stake notch we had, instead of cutting a straight line down, we're going to be cutting two angles in at each other from each side of where we want our notch. So what we'll do is we'll take the knife and make our first cut. and we'll just go in to the depth we want our notch. Now notice when I do this, I'm keeping my hands at all times away from the profile of the blade. So if the blade, for whatever reason, were to cut through this, I'm not slicing my hand open. So we get our first cut in. So as you can see, the knife is going in on an angle there. So what we would do is pull our knife out. So we have our first cut, and now our second cut. Now a mistake a lot of people do, it's not a mistake as much as a safety hazard, is they want to cut back in like this without moving anything. So if you're cutting this way and this bounces or slices through the wood, you're going to go right into your hand. So what I like to do is I like to turn the stick around that I'm working on and put the notch in this way. So now we're just going to make another angled cut, just like that. And notice how my knife popped into place right where that other notch stopped, the other cut stopped. So now when I pull my knife out, this little chunk comes out. So now what we have is a notch here. So I'm going to do the same thing as I'm going to clean this up like I did with the last one to put more of that V shape in it and make it look really clean. And there we go, we have our V notch right here. So the third notch I'm going to be covering is called a log cabin notch or a square notch. The square notch is going to be cut similar to our first notch we did, the stake notch, but we're going to be doing two stake notches facing each other. So see how this stake notch, the stop cut's here? We're going to put another stop cut here and notch in on both sides. So there's two methods of doing this. I'll show you both. The first one is we're going to make two of these as I just explained. So what we'll do is we'll cut in for our first notch. So right there we have our first stake notch. Now we're going to do another stake notch on this side. So I want it right about here. The size of this is going to depend on what you want the application, or how big of an application you need. So you would use this notch to join two pieces of wood together. It can also be used to build a log cabin in a large scale. So you would do this to the logs and allow them to match up and fit into each other. So that was my second stake notch on this side and my first one on this side. So then once you've done both your stake notches, you can just clean up and flatten it out. And there you'll go. You'll be finished with something like this. So we have two straight lines coming down and one across, and it makes this square shape. So if you were to do two sticks with this and lay them over each other, they'd fit in like that, and it would help lock them in place. Now the second method of doing this, which I usually prefer if I have a working surface or something, is we're going to cut two stop cuts, the straight down cuts, where we want our notch. So let me put in. Alright, so now once we have our two stop cuts in, one on either side, here, what we're going to do is going to take the tip of our knife, lay this down on your working surface. So I'll try to do it towards you. It's a little more difficult here. And what you want to do is take the tip of your knife, and you're going to be putting it, see how these two line up right here? You're going to be putting your knife at the bottom of where they line up. So, and just, you want to dig in right there. You can hold it steady. So you want to stick your knife in like that. Now, the reason I say you need or should use a working surface like a log, like a stump, anvil, or whatever, is so you're not doing this on your leg or on the dirt and potentially ruining your blade. So now what you're going to do is you're just going to tap the top of this and see how it popped out that piece in between the two. So now what you're left with is this notch right here. So all you want to do is just clean up. Once that's all cleaned up, you're left with another log cabin notch. Alright guys, so the last thing we're going to be doing with our notch stick that we've created, just for practicing purposes, is we're going to be doing a 3-cut stake point. So obviously it's going to make a point on the end of your stick with 3 cuts, and it will be a nice sharp stick point, so you can drive a stake into the ground or a pole for any number of reasons. So we're going to just make our first cut through the wood, just like that. So we have our first face. Now the next cut isn't going to be completely perpendicular to that first cut. We kind of want to angle it, almost like we're making a 3-sided pyramid. So we're just going to, instead of cutting here, we're going to rotate just a little further over and make our second cut. So as you can see, we already have a point and we have a flat edge that's connecting these two faces. So our last cut is going to be this backside where we haven't obviously cut anything yet. So keeping it level where we're making our cuts. So cut 1 started here, cut 2 started here, cut 3 is going to start right here. So when I make cut 3, we have a nice point on the end of that stick. Alright guys, so that was a simple notch stick. These are your basic notches you'll need to learn. I'm going to be using a lot of these in my Campcraft series. So that was the reasoning behind doing this video, is to kind of give that base knowledge, so if you need to reference it later on when I'm doing that series. So this is just a very simple notch system. You can just find your own stick in your backyard and practice this. You don't need to go out into the woods or be out in the middle of nowhere to do this. You can do it in your home if you really wanted to. But yeah, these are all very useful and have a lot of practical application. So I hope you guys learned something today. If you have any comments, questions, or concerns about any of these notches or anything like that, feel free to send me a message and I'll get back to you as soon as I can about it. Other than that, thanks for watching, and I hope to see you around.